Mm, So I would like to start my presentation just by saying a few words about who FORATOM is. So FORATOM represents the European nuclear industry in discussions with the different EU institutions here in Brussels. So the Commission, the Parliament, and the Council, and also with a broader range of different stakeholders. One of the key messages that we try to convey in our conversations is the important role of nuclear and what it contributes to the EU's economy. There are 107 reactors operating in the EU. We provide 100 billion euro per year in turnover. We support over 1 million jobs, and we currently account for 26% or around 26% of electricity production. Here you have an overview of the number of reactors operating in the EU. So as I said, there's 107 operational nuclear reactors. This shows how important nuclear is in the different member states. So you see at the very top, you have France, where 71% of electricity comes from nuclear. Then at the bottom, you have the Netherlands, where it accounts for 3%. There are also several nuclear power plants under construction in the EU, including 2 reactors in Slovakia and Hungary, 1 reactor in France, and 1 in Finland. So as I said before, nuclear accounts for 26% of electricity produced in the EU, but it actually accounts for half of the low carbon electricity, which is really important when we're looking to decarbonize the EU's economy by 2050. Already today, nuclear provides a significant contribution towards that goal. What do we do? I mean, essentially, like all trade association, we provide information and expertise on the role of nuclear energy. We do this through a variety of ways. For example, position papers, events, debates, interacting with the media, and site visits. Obviously, at the moment with COVID, we've not really been able to organize any site visits, but we hope to pick up on them again in the future. Here you just have a brief overview of some of the topics that we cover. Sorry, there seems to be a lot of background noise. Pochodzi z energetyki jądrowej, udało Holandię, gdzie stanowi 3% i dodatkowo jest jeszcze z Unii Europejskiej kilka reaktorów na Słowacji. So we cover issues in terms of EU energy policy. This includes the FORATOM treaty, but also the broader EU energy mix, the economics of nuclear, environmental policy, etc. We also focus on nuclear technology, of course, includes safety, research and development, waste disposal, in terms of the advocacy that we conduct on behalf of the nuclear sector. We promote nuclear energy. We aim to change the perception of nuclear energy here in Brussels. And we're also looking at ways in which we can encourage more young people into the industry. FORATOM is an association of associations primarily. So today we have 15 national nuclear associations. From the different EU member states, but also from non-EU European countries, including the Ukraine, Switzerland, and the UK. Furthermore, we have several corporate members in countries such as the Czech Republic and Poland and Estonia. So I wanted to start off talking about the current energy crisis, because this is a really important topic here in Brussels, and it has actually led to a change in the way in which the member states are talking about nuclear. I guess you're all fully aware of the current situation. There has been a massive increase in energy prices in the EU, triggered primarily by the increase in natural gas prices. All of this, of course, is due to the picking up of industrial activity in the post-COVID period, with significant demand from, in particular, Asia. But this has had an impact on global natural gas prices, and because in the EU, electricity prices are linked to those of gas, this has triggered an increase in electricity prices as a whole. So as I was saying, the causes include obviously the increase in gas prices, but also the increase in coal prices. Because more carbon intensive sources are being used, this has triggered and had a knock-on effect on the carbon price. So this has also increased the carbon price, which, as you know, in the EU, you have to pay for the volume of CO2 that you emit. And furthermore, over the summer, we saw a much lower output of renewables, such as wind. So again, this has led to supply shortages and, of course, triggered this increase in prices. One important factor to take into account is that the EU is quite heavily dependent on imports, in particular on natural gas imports. And these are the questions that are starting to be raised. Should the EU be looking to reduce its import dependence? Should it be looking to produce more of its own electricity rather than importing natural gas to fill the gaps? What we're trying to explain is that one of the measures to prevent a further escalation of energy prices is to avoid the closure of the existing nuclear fleet. More and more member states are recognizing the fact that nuclear ensures stable prices because uranium price fluctuations have only a very marginal impact on costs, and nuclear power plants have very often store up to 2 years worth of their fuel supplies. Because of all of this, nuclear can help stabilize final power prices. As I was saying, this discussion or this energy crisis has had an impact on the way nuclear is being framed in the conversations at EU level. What a lot of countries are now focusing on is, first of all, this energy crisis. What can be done to reduce the impact of escalating gas prices and wholesale electricity prices? They're recognizing that a lot of this is due to the fact that we are heavily dependent on imports. And so there's more and more asking the question, well, should we not be looking to shift away from such import dependency? In this conversation, we also have the point about having to reach the CO2 reduction target, so becoming net zero by 2050. How can this be done without triggering or having a massive impact on citizens and on industry, for example? I mean, I was discussing this yesterday at the European Social Sectoral Dialogue meeting with the trade unions, so it brings together trade unions and the employers. And the trade unions are extremely concerned. They point out that more and more households are facing energy poverty. And there's also increasing concerns that this massive escalation in energy prices is going to have a knock-on effect on industry because energy is an important part of their cost. It could render them much less competitive, and they could end up considering moving outside of Europe where they have more access to affordable energy. And of course, moving outside of Europe would mean job losses. So all of this is also to do with security of supply. We need to make sure that we have enough electricity to turn the lights on. Industry needs to make sure that they have access to the energy that they need 24/7. Public opinion, again, this is increasingly it's favoring nuclear. So more of them are starting to question, are these nuclear phase-out policies really the best thing for us in the future? We have the science on our side. There's more and more scientific reports and assessments that confirm that not only is nuclear low carbon, it's also cost competitive and it's also sustainable. And then we have these conversations around hydrogen, the role that nuclear can play in terms of producing affordable hydrogen, and looking more towards the future SMRs. How can small modular reactors be developed in Europe, and what will be the benefits of such technology? So all of these different elements are really triggering this much more positive conversation around nuclear. There's another important file which has also, I would say, perhaps benefited is not the right word, but which this energy crisis has had a positive impact on, and that is this EU sustainable finance taxonomy. Just to briefly run through how the file has progressed. So we had a year ago the technical expert group set up by the Commission that was unable to conclude on nuclear. So they were unable to decide whether it should be included or excluded because they didn't have the right expertise. They therefore recommended that before taking a decision, the Commission should ask a group of experts with an in-depth knowledge of the nuclear life cycle to assess nuclear against the criteria of the taxonomy. This work was entrusted to the Commission's scientific body, which is the Joint Research Centre. And the conclusion of this assessment was that, yes, nuclear does comply with the taxonomy. And what they actually said was nuclear does not cause more harm than any of the other technologies currently considered to be taxonomy compliant. The work was then reviewed by two further groups. As you can see, this was a really robust assessment. First of all, the Article 31 group of radioprotection experts, and secondly, the Scientific Committee on Health, Environment and Emerging Risks. They issued their opinions just before the summer, at the end of June. And overall, they agreed with the assessment of the Joint Research Centre. There were a couple of points raised by the Scientific Committee on Health, Environment and Emerging Risks, but these should be put into perspective. First of all, because they were looking at issues that are issues for different technologies. So one of which is the mining of uranium outside of Europe. And they asked the question, can we really be sure that it follows the do no significant harm principle? Of course, this is an issue not just for nuclear. It's actually a much greater issue for other technologies, such as solar panels, because they require much greater volumes of raw materials. So it is a valid point that they have raised, but it is a valid point for all technologies. They also recognized that on some issues, because they only had 3 months to do the work, they weren't able to bring specific experts on board because of this committee is primarily composed of doctors, toxicologists, ecologists, etc. So not pure nuclear experts. And so with regards to the deep geological repositories, they weren't really able to assess this because they didn't have the time to bring on board experts for that specific topic. Now, normally, once all this very robust assessment was complete, nuclear should have automatically be added to a complementary delegated act. However, there is still a political discussion taking place in Brussels. The debate seems to be moving closer and closer to the idea of adding nuclear to this complementary delegated act, although they have not fully discarded the option of putting it under separate legislation, which would actually contravene the principle of technology neutrality as enshrined in the regulation. But we do feel that the Commission is now recognizing that the science confirms that nuclear is taxonomy compliant. And they've also seen, and this is where I come back to my point about the discussion on the energy crisis, that there's more and more member states that actually support nuclear. So we have the traditional, what we call like-minded member states, who have always been nuclear supporters, but we're also seeing other countries, including Greece, Malta, Cyprus, so non-nuclear countries, that say whilst they themselves are not planning to build nuclear power, they do recognize that Europe and other member states should be entitled to still build nuclear. So because of all of this, the Commission is now under significant pressure to come out with this complementary delegated act, and we hope that we will see it by the end of this month. This slide gives you an idea of the risks of nuclear being excluded from the taxonomy. First of all, access to finance. The goal of this taxonomy is to encourage investors to only invest in those technologies which are considered to be taxonomy compliant. Now, it is a voluntary tool, but as you know, such tools provide significant guidance to the finance community. Nuclear, obviously, it has a very high upfront cost. And these sustainable finance portfolios are expected to make money available at a lower rate of return. So for projects like nuclear that have high upfront costs, this can significantly reduce those costs because for the money that they borrow, they would have to pay less interest. So of course, When you borrow significant amounts of money, the interest rate is key. There's also the fact that it could discourage investors from investing in nuclear if they can't class it as sustainable. So it may become more difficult to have access to that finance. We have also the policy side. This taxonomy is going to influence future policy. That much is clear. So whilst it may be voluntary, we are seeing more and more linkages and compliance requirements to the taxonomy regulation. This also applies to EU funds. At the moment, we're currently faced with a situation where very often you take, for example, the Just Transition Fund, nuclear is automatically excluded from accessing those funds, even if there is no justification for this. In terms of future policy, if nuclear is deemed to be taxonomy compliant, that will put an end to these automatic exclusions because there will simply be no justification to exclude nuclear. So we see benefits from that side, but also risks. And finally, the message, the science is clear. Nuclear is low carbon and sustainable, and the EU needs to accept this if it wants to maintain credibility. If we put together a politically motivated taxonomy, I'm not sure the finance community will trust that taxonomy is valid. And so it runs the risk of decredibilizing this taxonomy amongst the finance community. In terms of the status of the discussions, yes, we have seen several letters going around. Most recently last week, 5 member states signed a letter. But in terms of the discussions within the Council, we understand that there are now only 2 member states that remain vehemently opposed to nuclear, most notably Austria and Luxembourg, although I guess these come as no surprise to you. Others appear to be more open to accessing nuclear, and this suggests a bit of what we would call in English a gentleman agreement between gas and nuclear, in the sense that there are a lot of pro-gas member states, and so they are willing to kind of not block nuclear if that means that it can get gas into the taxonomy. This always happens at EU level. You have these political negotiations. Whether we support them or not, we have to accept that this may be the one way of getting nuclear into the taxonomy. And of course, as I mentioned, this potential impact of the energy crisis with, as I said, countries such as Greece, Cyprus, etc., saying that, you know, member states should still be allowed to invest in nuclear. Here you just have a few of the press articles because there's been an awful lot of discussion of nuclear in the media. So I just included some of these for your information. And finally, I wanted to cover nuclear at COP26. The reason I want to cover this is because I was there for 1 week, and what a transformation. I attended my first COP 4 years ago when I first joined the nuclear industry, and it was a very difficult conversation that we were having with people. People were very much, they weren't very supportive to nuclear. They weren't very open to having a conversation with us. This COP was totally different, and it's in part due to what is happening today on the taxonomy and the energy crisis. More and more people were coming to us because they wanted to have a positive conversation about nuclear. They were recognizing that nuclear does need to form part of the energy mix. They did still ask the usual questions in terms of safety, in terms of waste, etc., but they were much more open to having a conversation about those issues and getting the information from us. So we were present at COP. We had a stand under the Nuclear for Climate banner. But there were thousands of us there flying the flag for nuclear, not just in terms of people from the sector itself, from the young generation, but we also had the trade unions who were out there supporting us, and we also had the governments, we had the IAEA. They'd all become extremely vocal in terms of supporting nuclear, and it's something that has not been seen for years. Ministers were standing up and defending nuclear in the conversations. The IAEA organized multiple events and multiple speaking slots to promote nuclear. As you can see from some of the pictures here, these are from the different events organized in the French pavilion, the UK pavilion, and the IAEA. Here you have a couple of video links, which you are free to watch afterwards. So we have a webinar that was organized by Moody's, and then just for a bit of fun, the Nuclear for Climate flash mob, which took place in the center of Glasgow. So thank you very much, and that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Jessica, for a very interesting and inspiring presentation. Obviously, there are many questions concerning your presentation, but our first question is concerning Germany. What is your opinion concerning future decisions concerning phasing out of nuclear in Germany in light of current energy crisis and current discussions in EU? I am asking about your position, and obviously if you could also speak on behalf of FORATOM, please.
I think the issue when it comes to Germany, if we look at the current government that is being formed, you have two very anti-nuclear parties. So you have the Socialists and you have the Greens. In the past, of course, there was the CDU, which was supportive of nuclear, but within the coalition, it had certain agreements. So I personally, I don't think Germany is going to change its opinion. It's under a lot of pressure that we do recognize. It has environmentalists that have been writing open letters to indicate that the shutting down of nuclear makes no sense, particularly when it's being replaced with coal. But given that this new government is going to be even more anti-nuclear than the previous one, I think it's going to be very difficult for Germany to revert its decision. That being said, we do know that public opinion and support for nuclear is growing. So you never know, maybe in the future when SMRs become a reality and we have a different government in place, they may decide to invest in SMR technology. Who knows? But as things stand today, I don't see them changing their position with regards to the large reactors.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer. Unfortunately, due to time, we are running out of time. We need to pass to next presentation. So thank you for a very interesting presentation.